Alright, so as you know, the new patch is coming out, and I thought I would take the opportunity to show you which guns are getting their recoil changed, and to show you the pre-patch recoil, and then later on the post-patch recoil, so you can see what tangible differences actually DICE applied, and see whether or not they overdid it, or everything was well done. So the first gun that's getting changed is the M4A1, and as you can see I'm using no attachments other than the Cobra sight, so the gun is behaving as standard. And I'm going to spawn. So in the patch, the M4A1 is supposedly getting its recoil increased in all three directions. So I'm going to shoot up against this wall without controlling the recoil and see where the recoil gets me here. This is pre-patch M4A1 recoil. Alright, so it has a nice, pretty accurate up and to the right pattern. Alright. Alright, so here the patch is finally live, and we have some post-patch recoil to show you. So again, I'll be starting off with the M4A1. Again, Cobra sight and no other attachments, just to keep things standard. And as you can see, this is indeed the post-patch gameplay. You have the new letters marking on the flags on the minimap. So let's do an accuracy plot here and dump a mag. Alright, so that's a really consistent, very distinct up and to the right pattern, but it definitely seems to have a fair amount more recoil to the right, so the adjustment there is seen. Now the next gun getting adjusted in the engineer class is going to be the SG553. So again, I'm going to go with no attachments other than the Cobra sight, just for standard behavior. I'll spawn again, and we'll see how the recoil looks on this. We'll shoot a little bit to the side, and we're going to use this blue line as the starting point. As you can see, it has a pretty random recoil compared to the M4A1, which has a very nice linear pattern. It bounces all over the side, and it has a similar up and to the right pattern. It's just much more side-to-side recoil. Next up in the engineer class, we have the SG553, which had a recoil reduction. So again, no attachments, Cobra sight only. Let's spawn. Same thing, we'll empty out a couple of mags. Alright, that seems to have the same distinct up and to the right pattern, but the side-to-side shake seems to be reduced, and it's definitely recoiling a bit less to the right, so it's a little bit more centered. So again, I can instantly tell the adjustments that were made to this gun. The next weapon in the engineer class getting adjusted is going to be the G36C, and again, no attachments but the Cobra sight, just to keep things standard. Alright, let's keep this in line, starting over here. And here's the recoil. Alright, the G36C currently pre-patch has a very linear upwards recoil. It has a little bit of side-to-side shake, but for the most part it looks like it's fairly much vertical recoil. One thing about the G36C is that it doesn't seem to have a distinct tendency to the left or the right. It seems to tend a little bit to the left or a little bit to the right and never perfectly straight up. For here it's going a little bit to the left, but earlier it was tending a little bit to the right. That's more distinctly to the left. And this one is tending towards the right a little bit. So it's definitely a more random gun than the other two. Next in the engineer class we have the G36C, which also got a recoil reduction. Let's see how that fires compared to the original. Sorry for the frame drops there. Alright, let's dump a couple of mags. Doesn't seem to be much different. It's still got a fairly upwards pattern. It tends a little bit to the left, and it's not quite consistent with it. It seems to be playing a little bit more to the right on some patterns and a little bit more to the left on others. So I'm going to say not much here has changed. The last weapon in the engineer class getting adjusted is going to be the M4, which is the burst fire variant of the M4A1. And whereas the SG553 and the G36C are getting their recoil reduced, and the M4A1 is getting its recoil increased, the M4 is also going to get its recoil reduced. So spawning in again. And using the wall as a guideline. I'm just going to tap this out as fast as I can. Alright, just like the M4A1, it seems to have a very linear recoil, and it has a very tight pattern, almost straight vertical, just tending slightly to the right. Lastly, in the engineer class, we have the burst fire M4, which was a little bit interesting compared to the other changes in that it had a reduction in upwards recoil, but also an increase in side-to-side recoil to balance it out with the changes made to the M4A1, its automatic variant. So we'll spawn here and see what happens. Let's empty the mag. Alright, so it definitely still seems to have that very distinct and very linear up and to the right pattern, but it's definitely a bit more steeper this time. It's not quite nearly as straight as it was in the pre-patch version, so the adjustments here can be seen. Now moving on to the assault class, we have three weapons getting adjusted: the M416, the M16A3, and the M16A4. Starting off with the M416, I'm going to set it to no attachments other than the Cobra, just for standard. And the M416 is supposedly going to be having its recoil reduced in every single manner. That means horizontal, vertical, and first shot recoil are all going to be reduced. So let's take a look at that. Again, using the wall as a guideline. Let's empty this clip. Alright, the M416 has a very consistent pattern up and to the right, but like the SG553, it has quite a bit of side-to-side shake compared to, say, the M4A1 or the M4. Alright. The last gun we'll be looking at in the assault class that got adjusted is the M416. Again, we have no attachments. This also had a fairly large adjustment in this patch, and it not only got its vertical recoil reduced, it got its right horizontal recoil reduced, but it also got a slight increase to its left horizontal recoil. So where it used to be identical to the M16 in tending up and to the right, the recoil is a lot more balanced this time around, with a left value of 0.15 and a right value of 0.2. So this might lend to a less consistent tendency to the right or the left, and we'll see how that affects things. Oh yes, this recoil is almost perfectly straight up right now. This is a clear difference from where it used to be. Feels a lot like the Scar L. There's almost no need to compensate for left or right recoil. It just goes straight up every time. This is a huge adjustment. The next gun we'll look at is going to be the M16A3. Or let's do the M16A4 since it came up first. As usual, we'll go Cobra sight and no attachment on the barrel, just to keep things standard. Now the M16A3 is going to be a lot like how the M16A4 is going to function a lot like how the M4 will, being the burst fire variant. Unlike the M16A3, which will be getting a recoil increase, this is going to have a vertical recoil reduction as a burst fire variant. So here we go. So there we have a much tighter and more vertical pattern compared to the M416. It's very linear and very consistent. Alright, on to the M16A3. Alright, the next weapon we're going to look at is the M16A4, the M16A3's burst fire variant. Again, no attachments. And like the M4, the burst fire variant in the engineer class, it had a slight reduction in vertical recoil, but still got the same increases in horizontal recoil that its automatic version got. So let's see how this looks. Emptying the mag. As you can see, it's still pretty tight all the way up, but it's not quite as linear as it was in the pre-patch version, and it does seem to tend a little bit more to the right than it used to, so this seems like it has a pretty obvious adjustment here. Lastly, in the assault kit, we have the M16A3, which many felt was overpowered for a number of reasons. We're going to take a look at how the recoil behaves pre-patch right now for the last assault weapon, and deploying. Alright, right next to the M16A4, let's empty this magazine. Alright, very similar to the M416. It has a very distinct up and to the right recoil pattern. It has a little bit of side-to-side shake, but not quite as much as the M416. It's a very consistent pattern. Alright, here in Assault, this is the gun that everyone's been waiting to see the adjustments for. We have the M16A3. As you can see, it has no attachments other than the Cobra sight. And this is the big change that was coming with this patch, so we'll see exactly how this performs. Again, let's dump the mag. You can definitely see the more pronounced recoil to the right side. It does have the same tendency to go up and to the right consistently, but it definitely takes a little bit of a wider turn than it used to. Again, this is a pretty obvious change to the M16, but one that I can't really see affecting its usefulness since it still has a very consistent pattern. Alright, the support class has only one weapon being adjusted for recoil as of this moment, and that is going to be the MG36. Let's find it. Let's take off all the attachments just to ensure standard procedure, and put the Cobra on. Alright. The MG36 is slated to have its recoil reduced in the vertical direction to make it more controllable. Let's see how this behaves. Let's find an empty wall space. Alright. So, alright. So it has a very consistent up and to the right pattern, much like the M16A3 and the M4A1. It's fairly linear, especially for an LMG, but it does have some substantially higher vertical recoil compared to a lot of these other guns, as it reached its max amplitude much quicker. Alright. Lastly, we have two weapons to look at, and one of which is in the support class. The MG36 got a vertical recoil reduction. So again, no attachments but the Cobra. Let's see how this performs compared to its pre-patch version. Alright. Let's empty this mag. Alright, it's a little hard to tell if there's much of a vertical recoil reduction. It does look like it was adjusted a little bit. I can kind of feel the difference. But it still has a pretty linear pattern just like before, so this looks like it'll be a pretty good gun after the patch. And finally, one weapon in the Recon class is going to be adjusted, and that is the M417 with the foregrip. Initially, DICE has stated that the foregrip was reducing vertical recoil too much in the M417, so we'll see how that looks with the foregrip. Alright. Alright, with the foregrip we have a very vertical pattern, and the recoil did seem to be a little on the lowish side compared to some of the other semi-auto rifles, and we can compare that now with, we'll use the Mark 11 as a standard. Alright, so the last weapon I'm going to be showing is the Mark 11 Mod 0 with the foregrip, just to show how it compares to the M417 with the foregrip. They should have similar recoil in theory. We'll see. Alright, the Mark 11 definitely seems to have quite a bit more vertical recoil. It's a pretty substantial difference. I'm pretty sure you can see that there. So, that's it for the weapons being changed in this patch. And these are all the pre-patch values. So, as soon as the patch hits tomorrow, I'll be giving recoil plots these little rough plots over here just to compare to see how much has changed and how much hasn't changed. Alright. The last change we have was that the M417's recoil is supposedly increased when using the foregrip this time around. And again, as before, we're going to benchmark this against the Mark 11 with the foregrip. So let's see how this looks. This should look very much identical to the original grouping. Emptying the mag. Alright, it seems to have a pretty decent amount of recoil there. Let's look at the M417. Alright. M417 with the foregrip and a Cobra, as you can see. Nice lag over there. Awesome. Alright. What the fuck? Alright, here's the M417 with the foregrip, and let's compare the recoil. Alright, that definitely seems to have quite a bit more recoil than the original version. I'd say most of these adjustments can be pretty obvious compared to the pre-patch versions. Some of them are a little bit more subtle, but in terms of making the weapons more unique in their recoil patterns, I think DICE did a decent job at it. A lot of the weapons tended to have very similar recoil patterns, so that's one good thing. As far as the rest of the patch, well, I haven't actually played anything with the patch, so I can't tell you what things changed and what didn't. But here you have it. Pre-patch and post-patch recoil. You can clearly see the changes DICE made, and use this information to your advantage.